Hey, welcome everyone. My name is Tristan Claridge and I'm the convener of this webinar series for the International Social Capital Association. The association's mission is to advance the research and application of the social capital concept. And if you're interested in finding out more, you can access our website, and potentially you might think about joining the association as well. We're going to be holding our first international conference on social capital in February of 2026 in Dubai, and there's more information about that on our website. In this session, we welcome Dr. Alesia Zuccala for a presentation titled Social Capital in Academia, measuring researchers' collaboration preferences versus habits. Alesia began her academic journey in psychology before transitioning to the field of information science. She is a PhD graduate from the Faculty of Information, University of Toronto in Canada, and currently works as an associate professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. Her research bridges qualitative and quantitative approaches with a particular focus on scholarly communication and research evaluation. In recent years, her work has concentrated on the assessment of research outputs in the social sciences and humanities. We're delighted you've agreed to give this webinar. Welcome, Alesia, and over to you for the presentation.
Thank you so much, Tristan. I'm very glad to be here. And I hope I can provide some new insight into social capital in academia. And so I'll just begin by asking you, how many of you think you have social capital? And you can just put up your hands. I don't know if we can see it in the chat, so it's a little bit interactive. How many of you wish you could build more social capital? So, of course, and you are not alone. That is what I want to tell you. And I think that it's important to think about it. And if you were the little child in the sandbox and you just started networking with a dog, I think you have to go further than that. And there's a lot more to do when it comes to building social capital. So we begin with what is social capital? And I guess a lot of you probably have some background in this area of research, but for those uninitiated to this, I'll just provide a bit of information, sort of set the stage. So it's uniformly conceptualized in terms of social resources. And of course, we have the work of the French sociologist Bourdieu, who looked at class and conflicts and power functions, and the way that people of different classes advanced their self-interests amidst social struggle. Social capital is also uniformly conceptualized in terms of social resources. And I understand that Putnam also did research, American political scientist, on connections and norms of reciprocity, trustworthiness, how social connections are used to build and maintain a democracy. And then with social capital, we have the small world phenomenon. So subjects in Milgram's study, he was an American psychologist. He asked to get a letter to asked subjects to get a letter to one of his friends by passing it from person to person. They should choose someone they know on a first name basis. So the average number of persons was 6. And this gave evidence to what Milgram called his small world hypothesis. Then we had Newman, the British physicist, and he said that one could, in principle, construct a social network, and this would be a collection of people, each of whom is acquainted with some subset of others. So the network can be represented of points or vertices denoting people joined in pairs by lines or edges denoting acquaintances or friends or co-authors, or as we like it. So with social network theory, we have a set of actors and roles that are played in a network. And we have concepts like bonding, bridging, and linking. Granovetter's research looked at actors and weak ties and how they build bridges between other strong tie networks. And of course, with linking social capital, we have other organizations or systems that provide access to resources. And if we wanted to look at the idea of social capital and how it fits within the idea of social network analysis as a research method, we can say that social capital is sort of the lubricant or the catalyst of all these relations, mostly cooperative. And then with social network analysis, you have this boundaried set of actors, and what is revealed is the outcome of social capital. So I think that definitions of social capital, we can think of them as like different types of pasta. So we have alternative meanings depending on how it is applied and what the consequences are. Each definition is highly contextual, but they're usually common to the social sciences as a whole. And overall, based on my reading, my understanding is there's no set commonly agreed upon definition, but we do have various frameworks and schools of thought. And last but not least, is social capital a philosophy? And I guess we can go back to ancient times where Aristotle said that a man or woman is by nature a social animal. So anyone who either cannot lead the common life or is so self-sufficient as not to need to, and therefore does not partake of society, is either a beast or a god. So we do, as humans, have an impulse to partner with others. And this comes from our household, or it could be also political partnerships. But social interactions and social capital is actually complex also due to speech and language. And those who have a kind of critique of social capital, there's some acceptance for it, but I think this is actually a good critique in the sense that they're asking, is it a good concept? So there's 8 criteria for what makes a conceptual goodness. So the familiarity of the concept, the resonance, parsimony, coherence, differentiation, depth, theoretical utility, and field utility. So I recommend also looking at this as a interesting critique. So now to our study. So this gives you my understanding of the whole background of social capital as a research area. And of course, we wanted to focus on social capital in academia, my colleagues and I. And this started early as actually a master's degree project. So I had 2 young women master's degree students, and we launched a questionnaire together and tried to do some pilot research in this area. So again, we had to find out, well, how much has been done within this field of academia. And a lot of the work has been focused on co-authoring relationships and the social influence in this context. And what has been found is that scholars with strong ties, and in this sense, repeated co-authorships, they show a better research performance than those with weak ties. Also, the research has shown that authors that are positioned as brokers, so betweenness centrality, those instrumental that are developing in bridges, weak ties between different groups, they tend to benefit the most in terms of citations. And for every network structure or cluster that exemplifies well-positioned collaborating authors, we can also find structural evidence of exclusion. So there are good things about social capital in academia, and of course also negative things such as exclusion. And of course, we want to focus on more inclusion. So when I was reviewing the literature on social capital and co-authorship and social network analysis, I couldn't help but also check into some of the literature on collaboration research in academia, because of course, a lot of this relates to motives for collaboration, proclivities in collaboration. It also relates to work that's been done on collaborative roles. And then sort of the conditions in a person's environment that affect their collaborative choices. So just for example, Whitley claims that recognition and the attainment of credibility, it's actually a strong motivating factor to collaborate. And there's work that looks at links to individual preferences for collaborating and evolving network structures. And here there was four main strategic motivations that were uncovered, and that is the cognitive structural broker focused, serendipity focused, and also one sympathetic driver, so to reinforce existing relationships. So where are we? I found it very difficult to actually examine social capital. And I thought, well, if you look at the social network analysis literature, you have some boundaried work here around co-authorships and citations. If you look at the actual collaborative work, you've got motivations, proclivities, strategies. You can look at interdisciplinary connections, international connections, also working practices. So I found myself to be sort of in the middle of these two areas, these two fields. And I thought, well, how can I position our research? And so we've decided we would align it with a class of research called social capital research. So we really wanted to emphasize this is about social capital. And we also accept the idea of these features that are a given. So we wanted to focus on the underlying mechanisms of interpersonal networks and not really the networks themselves. So we didn't find or look for a predetermined boundaried network in this way. And in academia, we know that social capital is important because it's a significant precursor to, initial and continued academic success. And success in academia actually can mean many things. So it could be about advancing the university's mission. It could be about advancing one's own career. It could be related to puzzle solving. And it can just be about becoming familiar with, new ways of thinking, alternative ways of thinking. And I love this, just being at a higher risk of having good ideas. I think this is really at the heart of social capital. And we found for our research a kind of working definition from Ports and Sensenbrenner. So this is actually comes from an economics research paper. So social capital is the expectations for action within a collective that affect the goal-seeking behavior of its members. So I found that this definition sort of resonated the most of what we wanted to look at. So the emphasis here is on social connections as a resource leading to gains, as well as expectations and perceptions. And of course, you cannot, or I suppose you can, but it's really interesting to focus on social capital in light of some type of goal-seeking behavior. And so we asked the question in our research, actually, can we measure social capital? And in fact, it's sort of plagued with a lot of unresolved measurement issues. It's a concept that's notoriously difficult for measurement. And of course, Tristan Claridge says that the demand for relevant empirical measures has continued to outstrip supply. So we thought that we should try to find a measure that focuses on the cognitive or shared narratives, codes, and languages part of social capital, the relational or the shared understanding, norms and feelings, trusts that people have, as well as some of the structural ties like ties to an appropriable organization or research field, and how do people perceive the approach to building bridges or bonds within their networks. So we came to a conclusion that we should ask these two primary questions. So what do academics from various disciplines do when collaborating on research? And of course, the goal would be leading to a publication. This is the focus. And how do their habits in doing this compare with what they actually prefer? So in the research, we focused on one university population. It was a relatively good, strong population, although quite small. So it's not an international level study, but this helps us keep a wide array of additional variables constant. But we can open up the study of social capital to different faculties and therefore different academic fields. And we obtained individual responses from academics across the University of Copenhagen. And the demographic information was collected for gender, the faculty affiliation of our subjects, academic position, and also years active as a researcher. So we piloted the survey, and the first part of the survey, we looked at questions related to habits. So we have the first habit would be, and we measured this on a scale, so never, rarely, sometimes, often, and always. So for example, I work and publish research alone. I collaborate and publish research with people from the same department. I collaborate and publish research with people from different faculties or with other academic institutions in Denmark, presumably. And I collaborate and publish research with people from non-academic organizations or from other universities abroad. And finally, I think about the persons with whom I want to collaborate. So, and then for our measure of collaboration preferences, we had a Likert scale of strongly disagree to strongly agree. So, for example, the first question would be, I prefer to collaborate and publish research with people who share my ambitions for the research project. And so the questions were difficult to organize around cognitive, relational, and structural perceptions because we wanted them to be generic enough so that any researcher could sort of provide an answer regardless of their field or level of agreement to this type of question. So the idea is that any researcher could, to a greater or less extent, relate to questions about things like trusted competencies of their collaborators, productivity deadlines, as well as feedback and citations received after the work is published. So we came up with 27 questions, and they were organized according to cognitive, relational, and structural. And they also relate to these types of, they say, underlying features. So we have the questions themselves and the sort of underlying feature that they relate to, as well as the main coded themes. But when we implemented the questionnaire, we sort of mixed all the questions and in different orders. So they didn't appear in this order. And our survey response rate was good. So we had around 1,092. And, we looked also for, was this an acceptable response rate? And we looked at a few measures about this. So we found that it was actually fine. And with our questionnaire, of course, we had to make sure that we had all the right tests, like Bartlett's test of spherity, to see if the correlation between the items in our questionnaire were sufficiently large for this factor analysis. Sampling adequacy, tests of scale reliability. So in the Cronbach tests, alpha tests, we found, of course, that there were some questions that by removing them, we could probably get a better measure. So question 8, question 14, and a few of them. So this is a way to figure out, how can we develop this pilot questionnaire to make it a little bit more robust. But when we did the factor analysis, which is quite nice, we actually found that it does measure up to this theory that Napiet and Goschel had, that these dimensions are actually not really mutually exclusive, and there's in fact complex interactions between them. So we could take the questionnaire items, and then through the factor analysis, we found that some group together on what we would call reciprocity and obligation. Some were more aligned with bridging networks, links to a network, trust and familiarity, as well as shared understandings. So let's look at some of the results, and I'll just interpret this, and these come from the paper. So there were significant differences across all habits for academic position, years active in publishing, and faculty affiliation, except 7. So there was actually a significant effect related to gender at the 6th habit, at the 6th habit. That was where we found significance. And that was related to working and publishing with people from universities and institutions abroad. And we're not really sure what this means, but other research and collaboration has found that perhaps some men have more access to collaboration internationally than women do, or perhaps women, due to family obligations, they don't move around as much, or they have limited international collaborations due to time that they just don't have to invest in these types of relationships. So so there's actually research and collaboration that can sort of support this effect. And then when we look at the habits across different fields, we found some interesting patterns. So in the health and medical sciences, they collaborate almost as often with people from other universities and institutions abroad as they do with people from the same department. And then again, here, men, they collaborate often or always with people from universities or institutions abroad. But women, a higher percentage of women compared to men, responded to this question that they rarely or never do, slightly higher percentage. So the results in terms of preferences, again, we have all these sort of patterns in this sort of Gantt-like scale. So significant differences at the faculty affiliation. This is what we decided to focus on for the 12 preferences. So we found that these questions in particular sort of stood out as being really significant when it came to faculty. So the question about who share my ambitions for the research project, who bring resources from a research community different from mine, whom I know well, where we can take advantage of our different expertises, who are similar to me in my research, who share my expectations of work productivity, who agree with me on the paradigm for the project. This was a significant question, and who I know will comply with deadlines, who take a different approach than me, who are in regular contact with me about the project. This actually had a lot of significant variability. So who will increase my citation rate and have a positive effect on my H-index, and who come from a different academic background than me. So then when we looked at these preferences, again, we found that social scientists, so 51% agreed that their preferred collaborators were persons as ambitious as they are about a research project. So this came up as being quite an important response for the social scientists. In health and medical scientists, 46 agreed, 44% strongly agreed that it was preferential to have collaborators where they could take advantage of different expertise. In the humanities, which is interesting, 40% agreed that it was preferable to collaborate with persons who share the same ideas or the views or the paradigm for a given research project. And in law, there was a preference for being in regular contact throughout a research project. Humanists and theologians, respectively, they've strongly disagreed with a preference for collaborators who would increase their citation rate and have a positive effect on their H-index. So there's a lot of people in these disciplines who are not really in favor of the metric measures attached to their research. So when I looked at, so I also wanted to look at the correlations between these habits and preferences. So does what the academics say, does it match, does what they say they do match actually with what they prefer? And so we only focused on the 12 most significant preferences, and looked at these with the 5 habits. And we found that, so of course, when academics, they have this habit of thinking about with whom they collaborate. This actually corresponds significantly, but actually in a kind of weak way, with a preference for sharing expectations about work productivity. So this sort of makes sense, I think, because, you know, nobody wants to have somebody who's late with deadlines or has no time, or you end up doing all the work yourself and this kind of thing. So also, another significant but weak correlation was found between a preference for resources from a research community that is different and a collaboration of habit of working with people from different faculties. So that kind of makes sense that if you want to, if you actually like to obtain resources from a different community, of course, you might seek somebody out from a different faculty at the university. The ones that were not strong were, if you look at a preference for taking advantage of different expertises and collaboration habits involving people from different faculties, from other academic institutions, and from non-academic organizations. So there seems to be some barrier or something that doesn't make this preference sort of activate so well when it comes to when you think of it as a habit and you think of it as a preference, this is not really correlating very strongly. So we have these points for discussion. So we found also, as we do these measures and as we, you know, constructed this questionnaire, it's actually quite difficult to separate what people internally prefer with external factors, because there's often a lot of research where it's you know, funding agencies will stipulate that there is some sort of involvement in intra-organizational or international collaboration or interdisciplinary collaboration. So this is very difficult to tease out, and so you have to rely on the, you know, what really is your internal motivation or preference here. We also found that it really does help to focus on a relevant outcome. And when we did early work on this topic, and for example, an early review of the first draft of the paper, some people said, yeah, but there's so many other goal-seeking activities in academia, and there's so many other types of social capital that you need. And I said, yes, that's true. There are different types of goal-seeking in academia, but if you focus on a relevant outcome, it's easier to get the focus or the answer you need. So, you know, every researcher is expected to publish. So we thought this was probably the best, most broad goal-seeking behavior that we could focus on in this type of questionnaire. And we don't know, but we did this research during the corona pandemic, so the responses could have been affected due to the lockdown. So, yeah, and there was actually research that noted there was a rise in international collaborations concerning COVID. So that changed the way people focused on their research, and also a predilection for more national collaborations at that time, right? So this could have affected how they thought about social capital at that time. But overall in the research, we found a very strong preference for certain determinants like reciprocity, obligation, trust, and trustworthiness, shared understanding. So we have also, when you do research like this in a country where there's English is a main and international language of academia, but of course the Danes speak Danish in their collaborations with each other. So perhaps this connection, right? The shared understandings. I can communicate so easily at this at this time when we're developing this collaborative work, and we're looking at a catalyst for it. So the shared understandings and the trust were really important. But linking to other networks or trying to broker ties to other networks, this wasn't really on their mind as much. And I think that one of the problems of looking at social network analysis is that, academics are not really structural visionaries, so usually when we do research, we're focused on what's familiar, what's comfortable, what works best in light of what the administration at the time demands of them, how it fits within their teaching and other obligations, and what fits best with the career goal at the time. We're not in this mindset of, oh, I think I'll be a broker if I do this, or I'll play this role if I do that. So we're not really structural in that sense. So other conclusions. So a habit of working with people from non-academic organizations. This was not a prevalent response choice. Yet many academics did respond that they had this preference for collaborators with outside or other expertise. So there's kind of a barrier. So how could we explain this? Well, perhaps this kind of collaboration is best left to an engineered approach. And it's also quite related to funded research. So that's how people get in touch with doing research with organizations, because it's part of a funded project, or it's been engineered in some way. So it's not that natural or easy to do as just a general collaborative approach. So we didn't really find that many significant correlations between preferences and habits. I mean, they're sort of weak. And why? Well, this could mean that there's only a few elite or top academics, maybe the really well-funded academics, or, seniors. These are the people that can manifest their preferences to achieve these desired outcomes. This is a possibility. And of course, academics, we all work in different socio-political, economic contexts, but at the core, we all value this sort of feeling of academic freedom. So I don't know if we could say this relates to policy. So are there ways within different contexts that we could sort of ensure, support, foster the way we experience social capital, and that it actually fits with what academics and researchers really prefer? So, and I say the core part of it, as a rewarding experience in and of itself, sort of this is what the heart is of it. So I'm actually now working on a paper with Professor Julia Melkers at Arizona State University. And we want to do research on collaborative preferences and strategies, mobilizing social capital for academic productivity. So what we've done is we've taken the same survey and sort of, altered it a bit based on some of the other validity testing that we did at the initial pilot of the survey. We sent it out to academics across the United States, like a kind of further reduced, but same survey. And so far we have over 2,000 responses. So we're really anxious to see what's going to happen when we survey these academics across the US. So that's it. Thank you kindly for your attention. And you're welcome to read the paper that came from this research. It's published in Research Evaluation. And yeah, I think it's fine to open the field for Q&A.
Great. Wonderful, Alesia. Thanks very much for the presentation. I did post a link to your paper in the chat for anyone who's interested in accessing that.
That's great.
So let's open it up for questions from the audience. Feel free to either raise your hand within Zoom. You can access that from the reaction or react button in Zoom, and then raise your hand. And we'll come to you as soon as we can. Alternatively, you can post your question in the chat, and we'll come to you in the order in which they're posted. If you don't want to read out your question or ask your question yourself, unmute yourself and ask your question, I'd be happy to read it out on your behalf, but just let me know so that I can do that rather than calling upon you. I might ask the first question if I can, and I want to build on what you were saying about the potential barriers that may exist, that people may have a preference or an expectation to act in a certain way, but ultimately they can't because of the kinds of barriers that might exist. And I think
Yeah.
in the research that I do, I see that quite a bit, where
Mm.
they may lack even the social skills in order to enact that kind of preference. They may not know the people, feel like they can call upon them, or perhaps there's a lack of trust, or there's all of those kind of factors tend to get in the way. So I'm not sure exactly what my question is, except that it seems like trying to understand what those barriers are will shed a lot more light on the reason why you are seeing relatively weak correlations between the
Hmm.
preferences and the
Hmm.
habits.
Yeah, I think that very much says a lot, the weak correlation. So that we can only say that some people are able to manifest their preferences to fulfill their habits. That's sort of what we're looking at here. So who are these people? Why are they special? Why are they able to do it? And perhaps in light of what you said, yeah, they have fewer barriers. And I think it's true in general in social capital in sorry in academia that um, it's really, really hard to get your needs met, what you need to fulfill your goals. And you sort of we're all climbing to the top, and we need funding to do this. So there could, yeah, we
Yeah.
need time. We need these are associated barriers.
And perhaps that's a wonderful way to communicate that to potential funders, that that the weak correlation suggests that there's social capital is underutilized effectively in academia, that assuming the preferences represent things that are positive and productive and are going to be good
Hmm. Hmm.
for the
Yeah, sure,
academics
things
and
you
for
like.
research generally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe that's a way of saying to funders, look, there's weak correlations here, which really is meaning that there's too many barriers that are getting in the way of academics actually being able to utilize their social capital in ways that they want to. And we need to do something about that if we're to improve research output.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if this is the responsibility of the funders because, of course, they do have there's limits to how much they can give out unless it's they are involved. But I would think it's also the policy of the university. I mean, a lot of universities have academics that are not necessarily highly funded, right? We're teaching, we're doing administration, we're doing what we're supposed to do. But we do have our research goals, and instead we just grumble like, oh, yeah, well, or we take a lot longer to fulfill these preferences. It takes longer to build trust. It takes longer to, whereas the funding mechanism will give you a lot more uh, respectability and it gets you there faster. So is it the funders? Yes, they're involved, but I think the universities ought to respect the needs of their academics and say, well, should we organize teaching and research differently to allow for more time to build social capital? Should we have
Sure.
events that lead to better social capital? Like, should we have stakeholder programs where we invite stakeholders to meetings and have mixers where we get other people together and so that they can benefit from external expertise in organizations where the research would have the most benefit or impact. So yeah,
Yeah.
indeed.
And until we understand what those barriers are, I guess it's difficult to know exactly how we might go about addressing those problems, which is why I was suggesting perhaps funders might be interested in funding research that can help to identify what the barriers are. But of course, ultimately, it's the higher education institutions, it's the universities who are employing academics who would like to see, of course, improved research output and more productive employees. And so they, of course, would also be interested in identifying and trying to mitigate these barriers as well.
Well, there's also this tension between research output that has an impact and then the what you prefer as a rewarding research experience yourself. But at the same time, I think most of us feel rewarded when our research has an impact. So yeah, there's a lot of discussion on all these sort of surrounding issues, but I guess I feel that social capital is at the heart of it. I agree with you in the sense that we're all familiar with the barriers and we all understand how collaboration works. And there's a lot of work and a lot of research on that, but understanding social capital is much more difficult. It's the lubricant, it's the catalyst for getting everybody together, right? How do we make that happen?
Yeah. And I guess it's the lack of social capital, to talk very, very broadly about
Yeah,
social
yeah,
capital. It's its
indeed.
lack, which is in many ways the most underappreciated barrier that perhaps exists.
It's underappreciated and notoriously difficult to measure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, of course, your research goes a long way towards highlighting those kinds of issues, and particularly like when we're seeing those weak correlations, where we're understanding much better that there is an untapped potential there, a missed opportunity, I guess, to be able to utilize social capital more effectively.
Indeed, indeed. And I guess I thought it was sort of apropos in the beginning. You have to start very young with your social capital habits as a young scholar, as a young career individual. So
And these are
maybe
things
we
that
should
aren't
open
often
it up
talked
to other
about.
questions. Cameron,
Absolutely.
hi. Yeah,
Yeah,
hi,
Cameron,
Cameron.
go ahead,
Yeah,
Cameron. Feel free to unmute yourself.
yeah.
Thanks for the talk. It's really thought provoking. I'm knee deep in trying to disentangle elements of research culture and measurement of research culture at the moment, which is closely related for obvious reasons. I was thinking in terms of the conversation you were just having. So I can see two things. Yeah, the institutional element seems to me really key in terms of why these correlations might be weak. Indeed, who these
Yes.
people are, what power they have, and whether in fact the people who are, can you actually turn this on its head and say, well, those people who are actually exercising their preferences are those that actually have the most social capital, and does that actually play out as a heuristic? But I also wondered, this is coming from where my obsession is right at the moment, but there's the institutional piece, the sort of formal environmental context, and then there's the
Mm-hmm.
disciplinary cultural piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
wondered whether you considered also asking the set of questions about preferences framed as what people think their colleagues want. So
Mm,
we've done a couple of things I've been
yeah.
involved with. We've set this question. So I did some stuff ages ago on scholarly communication preferences or goals in mathematics scholars with some folks in New Zealand, and Scholarcom Lab in their work on tenure and promotion in the US. Did a similar thing where we essentially asked a set of questions similar to your preference questions and framed them first as what do you want, and then secondly, what do your colleagues want? And what
Okay.
in our work, because we were asking about reform, what we find is everyone thinks they're progressive themselves, and everyone thinks their colleagues are more conservative. And I
Oh,
wonder
wow.
whether
Interesting. Wow.
this might
Yeah.
be diagnostic of
Yeah.
another set of cultural reasons why the correlation isn't there. Are we in fact setting ourselves up for failure because we don't believe that other people want the same things as we do, if that makes sense? So there's the institutional piece. I completely agree. And I think I agree with you, Alesia, that the funders have less to play here than the institution, less power here than the institutions do, in fact, in changing some of these things.
Yeah.
But I do
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
institutions of our disciplines.
Yes. Yes. So I think, yeah, of course, socio-political culture and institutional culture will play a huge role, especially in this research, because of the fact that I'm doing it in a culture and a country that is relatively homogeneous, right? It's like we 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 have fewer internationals in our context, right? It's mostly Danish speaking context. We do have meetings, of course, in English, but a lot of meetings are held in Danish, especially at the management level. And so I think just that starting point alone will play a role in how people see trust and trustworthiness. And maybe in a homogenous culture, you're more apt to believe that my colleagues want the same thing as me because we're all the same. You know what I mean? I'm not sure, but I thought that your questionnaire is very interesting and would be like nice to test it in different environments, right? Because in Britain, you have so many different academics that convene in these English-speaking cultures, right? They come from all over the world, and so it's the language of academia is English, but it doesn't mean that everybody's English, right? But here, mostly, all the academics are born and bred in Denmark, and they do stay and take up positions in their universities here. So yeah, so your take on the other side of it, I mean, maybe we can talk and actually implement something, do what you've done, right? And then look at it from these different points of view. So
I thought it'd be
yeah.
cool. I think I'd be fascinated to see what the US results look like.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
going to be
yes.
amazing.
Yeah, I mean, the idea really is to get the instrument right and to make it good enough, robust enough that you can sort of use it in different contexts. I think this is what our goal was. And I don't even fancy myself as a developer of questionnaire instruments, but it sort of had to be done in order to go in this direction. So
Yeah, great. So there's a couple of questions coming up in the chat. There's one that's come through from YouTube, but Najib has a question. I believe he has to leave shortly. So we'll see if we can get to that one first. He asks about barriers to cooperation between academics, like selfishness and the problem effect of competitors.
oh.
What could be the result? Because academic people, they're all human and need to enhance the social capital in the academic world.
Yeah, I mean, there are human barriers, and I guess the thing is you might have a preference and say, wow, I would really, yeah, I can open up and say there are some people around me that, oh, I would really like to collaborate with them. But then as much as I try to build social capital with them, it doesn't work. And then I think, okay, how do I explain it? And so you can chalk it down to I mean, selfishness is the hard word to say or to use, but I could say, well, what context breeds this selfishness? It's they have their network. Maybe they don't need me, but I need them. And this human struggle always exists, right? Where you need somebody, you want to build social capital with them, but they've already got their network. They already got what they want. So they're not thinking social capital is also is something you generously provide. And maybe that's true. People are not thinking about how to be generous in in allowing social capital to breed, right? So that's the human problem, the competitiveness, the selfishness, the I've got what I want, who cares about you kind of, mentality. And we don't know, but that is a barrier. We don't know if that's what's happening and how often, but it can be a barrier.
Certainly following Alejandro Portes's definition of social capital as behavioral expectations, I think we would say that
Yeah.
if people's expectations are that others are going to be selfish, we can't imagine we'd describe that as a situation where there's good or strong or high social capital, because people are their expectations are going to be to serve their own interests rather than collaborating or rather than looking out for the interests of others. And so I guess, when we're thinking about measuring social capital, there always seems to be multiple reasons for the behavioral expectations. Of course, it needs to align with self-interest to some extent, but not necessarily selfishness. But it also can align with, moral or value rational reasons, so there might be a whole range of different reasons why people have the expectations that they have.
Yeah, expectations, preferences, and I mean, this also aligns with what Cameron said about what do you think your colleagues think, and that's what I think. If you ask me, what do I think my colleagues think? I think they have enough. I think they have what they need. So for me to try to insert myself in and build social capital, it's a you have to have a mutual need. It has to fit like that, right? Where you understand that you both need something and you're both going to bring it to each other. And it doesn't always happen that way.
Yeah, and I guess if I think that you don't want to collaborate and you think I don't want to collaborate, then those behavioral expectations are getting in the way of us actually collaborating. You know, it's not strong social capital if that's what we think each other think. So I think Cameron's, on the right track there, that asking.
Yeah, he's on the right track. Yeah, I like that
Yeah.
idea. It would be interesting to test it against time and say, is it time or is it human? I think a lot of people are like, oh, great idea. But I don't have the time, That's more, is it 50% I just don't have the time and energy? Or is it 50% I have what I need and I don't really want to think about you? Like, So that's how I perceive. There are two sides. I perceive my colleagues as not having the time, or I perceive my colleagues as having enough to not need to include me.
Yeah, I guess there could be lots of reasons. Time
Yeah,
being
but
one,
so the
and
barrier,
selfishness being another, and yeah.
I agree with you on the barrier approach, yeah, and the perception approach from I guess we just focused on what people perceive, like, so what do they do, and then what do they perceive for themselves? But if you wanted to bring that extra layer of barriers, then there'd be a whole other set of questions. Could also actually expand the questionnaire to make it, double-barreled in that way, right? So so Cameron, we have something to think about.
Feel free to jump in, Cameron, or in fact, Najib,
Yeah, feel free to
ask
jump
the
in,
original
Cameron,
question.
or anybody else, please. I'm really open. I'm open to your thoughts, and I agree with them. I mean, we are humans, and we have to be honest about what it means. That's definitely it.
Thank you very much, Alesia, for
Thank
your
you.
nice
Thank
presentation.
you.
May I know from you, from your slide presentation, result session, that you explored that 31% are disagreed from theologians and 24% disagreed from humanitarians. Do you think what are the cause behind this disagreement?
So the H index, why did sorry, I'm sorry.
Why did they disagree? That's 31% disagreed from theologians and 24% from humanitarians.
Shall I go to the slide that you're referring to?
Yeah, I think it was your results slide.
Yeah, results right.
Was it the here?
Yes, that.
Yes.
What are the reasons?
Strongly
Yes.
Strongly disagree. What is my thinking on this?
What are the reasons behind this percentage? These people do.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, so the reasons, because productivity in these fields doesn't really lead to a high H index in general. I've worked with the cost action of research evaluators in the humanities and social sciences, and it's by and large a lot of them are not really in favor of these metric measures because you really, like, compared to the H index of the rapid turnover rate and publication rates in some of the sciences, even parts of the social sciences, the H index can be a really, a quick measure of how well you're doing in terms of your publications and citation rate, but it's not really something that would motivate somebody in the humanities, like the deep humanities, even theology, right? So they want to publish things that yeah, it's not interesting for them. They don't, that would not be something that they prefer. Like if I publish with this person, I'll get more papers out, or I'll have a better H index. They just don't. It's not part of their, And then, I mean, and then you can see actually the areas where they were sort of okay with it would be, feels like in the sciences and medical community, although they don't want to put that much focus on it either. So
Yeah, it doesn't seem like anybody really wanted to put too much focus on it.
Thank you very much.
not really. No. And I think that has to do with the way things are going culturally within Denmark, like this isn't really the way you get promotion and tenure,
Yeah. So we've
Not
got a
really
question.
how-
A
Yeah.
question from Alejandro we'll get to in just a moment. There was a question just going back a little bit further from Katarina, who is on YouTube, who asks about, I think you've already talked about this already, about national or regional specificity. So whether or not Denmark may be rather specific environment for cooperation and academic work. So if you only have any other thoughts you want to share about that.
Yeah, I mean, it is very much a specific environment, as most of the Nordic areas, because um, I don't know how to explain it, but there's been research that done like what's the norm? So in the norm in Canada, when I did my PhD, I was told that I would never get a position at the institute in which I did my PhD, that it was definitely appropriate to leave, go abroad, or go to another province or another university. So it's standard in North American culture that you don't stay where you did your research as a young scholar, as a PhD. But in some of these Nordic countries, it would be normal for a Swede to stay and continue on and stay and build their career, not just at the same country, but at the same university, right? So think of all the years and that you build trust with people, the familiarity. Think of all of that, how that gets that's built through homogeneity and long-term connections and familiarity, and this is very much a part of that. It's very hard to move and get acquainted with people and get into a new institution and fit in and find your network and build social capital. And so I think you either build it in one way in a homogeneous sense, or you build it in a much more fluid sense if you belong to a culture where you have to move a lot.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I guess the results you're getting, the new research you're doing in the United States will provide at least some comparison for what it's like in different
Yeah,
places.
this is what we hope. We really hope. Yeah, we don't know. Or maybe it would just be a whole new study in and of itself. We're not really sure. We started off thinking of it as a comparison, but yeah. Or maybe we're still just formulating our way. We're right now the focus is on the instrument. We cut out some questions that were a bit too similar and didn't fit, and so narrowed the questionnaire, reduced it a little bit, and yeah.
Yeah. And Katarina on YouTube says, thank you very much for your insightful answer. I know nobody on Zoom can actually see those comments unless you're also watching on the
Thanks.
YouTube stream as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's move to Alejandro's question as well. The question is, we had a couple of 2024 workshops on fair ways of doing just international collaborations, UK, Brazil, or UK, Southeast Asia, for example. Did you have any topic that touched on this subject in your study or elsewhere?
Fair research? On fair research?
Fair ways of doing just in inverted commas, just research.
No, I wouldn't say our research it may have sort of come out, and we could interpret some of the data through that lens, but I don't know. I don't know if we didn't really directly focus it on as a preference, I would say. Just research. You mean justice-oriented research or research that's fair in terms of how you implement your projects? And if you can elaborate, it might help.
I think Alejandro is talking about fairness, I believe.
Fairness? Well, fairness is not a. I mean, at the start of the research project, we very much talk about the fact of the Matthew effect. I mean, academia is not a meritocracy, so there's no fairness in academia in general. So that's why you don't get, yeah, I mean, I suppose that's why we don't get a lot of strong correlations between preferences and habits. Life's not fair. You just don't get the funding. You're not, I don't know, you're not part of the culture where you're working, or, there's all kinds of things that are not fair, right? And how do you get around that? I don't know. I don't know if this answers the question.
Alejandro clarified that it was fairness between higher income researchers and lower income international research collaborators, particularly around resource base allocation, responsibilities,
Yes.
output.
Yeah. So, okay. So we did have this one question about international connections, right? But we didn't look at it specifically as a, north-south kind of collaborations, right? So it was not specified. It was like I collaborate with institutions abroad. That was just the one habit that you might have, right? But it didn't specify that it was, between, Denmark or Sweden or Denmark and sort of the global south, somewhere in the global south, and how that kind of social capital can help enhance understanding between different cultures and research and build better communities of research, right? As a result of that. So there's a lot more, that kind of research is more in the collaborative side, like if you can look at north-south collaborations and then the impact that it has. So that's a more very specific focused area of research. So I wouldn't say we didn't really focus on that, except for the fact that, yeah, different resources can also not be looked at in terms of fairness. But if I was a humanist and I thought, well, the digital lab over at the sociology department had much better equipment, for example, then that's why I would want to collaborate with somebody there, right? And use their resources. But we're certainly not looking at international resource sharing. No.
Yeah, sure. So another question, or perhaps more of a comment coming through from YouTube as well. Moreau says, I'm a bit surprised by the conclusion that only a few elite or star academics at the university were able to demonstrate social capital preferences to achieve the desired collaborative outcomes. It seems a bit sad, but it contrasts with their experience. Also, referring to the previous question, is it possible that in another country, not so much another university, the results could be substantially different?
It could be different. I mean, look, I shouldn't call that a conclusion. I think I should be fair and say perhaps the weak correlations show. So if you look at the correlations themselves, you're saying that there are certain people that can manifest their habits as a result of their preferences. That's what we're looking at, right? And how do you interpret that? Why is that a correlation? Why does that exist, but weakly? I guess it just came to my mind that there's a specific set of people that are okay with this, that can do this. But we didn't ask whether or not it was due to funding. But we can presume that it helped, or seniority helped, or something. So I would say, and with funding and seniority, you're generally one of the elite academics. So that's how I sort of came to that conclusion. But it's not really a conclusion. I would call it a guess, I suppose, an interpretation. a question, something to think about.
Yeah, and perhaps we could use the lens of Bordeaux to try and understand how his interpretation of social capital, maybe factoring into that as well, that it's baked into social status and prestige,
It's
the
baked
family you're
into, it is really,
born
it
into, and
is.
so forth. Yeah.
That's well known in academia. If you belong to a culture where that's not necessarily so, and it's more evenly distributed, then that's great. I mean, this is what we all want, right? The idea of this kind of, we want social capital to be more evenly like more readily available and built. And so it's institutions themselves have to take a hard look at what's going on, you know. Do people feel okay when they're doing work in at that institution? Do they feel like they can accomplish what they want to accomplish? That's just and if you did a survey just asking them that, then you can probably guess that social capital is not working.
Yeah. Oh, these are big and important questions for sure.
Mhm.
Mauro said, thanks you for that answer on YouTube. So we have about a little bit of time left. If anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand within Zoom, or quickly post something in the chat if you have any further questions or comments. While we're waiting to see if there is anything else left, I was wondering, you alluded to the challenges of working with the concept of social capital, because it's not often or not well defined. There's often not quite sure exactly how to go about measuring it. What were your biggest takeaways from it? Like, are you finding it a worthwhile and useful concept as an analytical tool for your research?
Yeah, I mean, enjoyed working with it, and I've always been preoccupied with it. You know, I'm an international academic. I've moved to Denmark. I worked in different cultures and different places, and so I've always been preoccupied with it as just a general thing for myself. So, but when it comes to measuring it, I thought, oh, this is really, really hard. I know it exists. I can feel it. I know there's issues around it. But like I said, you have to focus on a goal-oriented behavior in particular, because I've said some critique. Yeah, well, everybody, social capital is here and you need it there and you do it at a conference. And I'm like, yes, well, yeah, but if you want to measure something, you need some kind of goal or outcome, right? You need some dimensions that you want as to measure, look at. And so with social capital research, my experience has been look at what's out there, look at the theories, find one and find a framework. There's nothing wrong with picking a specific framework, but just be consistent with it and be consistent with your definition. And because I don't feel like it's wrong to have multiple ways of looking at social capital, or multiple frameworks or multiple theories. By and large, they converge, though. Like, I think most people would say there's different dimensions to it. Of course, there's cognitive dimension. Of course, there's a relational dimension, and maybe some people say no, it's only structural, but it's only this, it's only that. Just, I feel we're academics. We must be consistent and clear about the choices we make in these approaches. I wouldn't, and if I was evaluating any research, I would just look for that, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that consistency
I would
is
just
so
look for that.
important.
Are you consistent? Are you clear? Have you chosen the framework? Do you see, if you're measuring something, do you want to find how it relates to an outcome or a combination of patterns, or no?
Yeah, I think that's what I liked most about your paper, was that you, by focusing on the goal-oriented outcome of publishing, you're able to separate all of the things that social capital might potentially do. It's a lot of things. It does a lot of things, and if you're
It
just
does a
trying to
lot of things.
measure it,
It's part of, yeah, yeah.
yeah, if you're just trying to measure it in a generic kind of way, then you're really unsure about the outcomes that it's producing. But by doing it in a specific way, you can then ask those questions that lead to to that specific outcome that you're interested in. So
Yes,
you're not
indeed.
not
Yeah,
measuring
yeah.
social capital in your study in terms of how it might affect public health decisions or something. You're interested in measuring in relation to academic publishing, and that to me is it creates that consistency and that precision that's so important in any kind of scholarly inquiry.
And everybody sort of has to do it. I mean, it's required. You can actually look at social capital in terms of, hiring, promotion, and tenure, right? That could be the outcome. So you could also find another goal-oriented area in academia.
Right, or teaching performance, or there's so many. You're right. There's so many different
teaching
things
performance.
you could focus on. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, and from my own experience, I could feel like, the language, but then that's more complex because being part of a different culture, if you don't have the language, if you're, social capital in all these different areas tied to a certain outcome makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, are there any other questions? Your last chance, if you have something you'd like to ask or a comment you'd like to make, you need to get in now. So, Alesia, is there anything else you'd like to share? Anything you haven't thought of yet that you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap up?
No, I don't think there's anything I want to share except my gratitude. I'm very happy that you invited me to do this because, this was a little paper that it actually took a long time to produce it. And I feel like it's just gratitude, really. I really feel happy that I was able to be here and to talk about it and to have this little paper have a bit of exposure. And I hope it stimulates more work in this area. I was told earlier that, oh yeah, social capital, everybody study. Oh, there's so much research on that, as if it was an untouchable field, or that it was reserved only for these social capital gurus, right? People who've been doing this research their whole life. And I just didn't agree. I just thought, okay, I'll try it, and took a long time to get it out there. So I'm very grateful that you invited me to do this. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. I really enjoyed your paper, and I'd encourage everyone to check it out and have a read of it. So let's wrap it up. Alesia, again, thanks very much for giving this presentation. We really appreciate it on behalf of all of the members of the association. Our webinar series is ongoing. Next week, we have a presentation that's actually presenting the result, a new book on social capital that's called Economics of Social Relations, Critical Perspectives on Social Capital. So that's next week. And then the following week, we have a webinar that's looking at social capital assessments in higher education, and actually looking at the different ways in which social capital is measured in higher education research. And there's some quite interesting insights coming out of that one. So if you're interested in any of these topics, check it out on the website. And of course, everyone's welcome to register for those events.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Look forward to seeing you next time.